Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Favreau.
I'm Dan Pfeiffer.
On today's pod, the first day of public impeachment hearings did not go very well for the president, and we're going to talk all about it with our guest, former acting U.S. Solicitor General Neil Katyal, the author of a brand new book on impeachment. We're also going to talk about how the schedule for an impeachment trial in the Senate could affect the members who are running for president, and about the news that yet another Democrat, Deval Patrick, is making a late entry into the 2020 primary. Also, check out Pod Save the World this week, where Tommy and Ben talk about Bolivian President Evo Morales' downfall and whether it was a popular uprising or a military coup. They also cover Turkish President Erdogan's decision to briefly pause his ethnic cleansing of the Kurds to visit his friend Donald Trump in Washington. Then they talk to former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd about China and why he believes Rupert Murdoch is a cancer on American politics. Yeah, you know, Kevin Rudd was in the office, and every once in a while, someone comes into Crooked Media, and I'm like, what are you doing here? Like George Mitchell was here once. Sometimes there's just people I'm like, you seem like you're like too respectable of a figure to be coming to our podcast studio.
I feel that way when I see the Instagrams of the Keep It guests, but it's like, you're too cool to be in the office.
Well, there's that too. Yeah, we get some celebrities in here who I'm like, what are you doing here? And then there's Kevin Rudd and George Mitchell. It's quite a group that comes walking through this office. Okay, so one more announcement from us. You guys were all so generous to donate to Fair Fight 2020, which is Stacey Abrams' effort to fight voter suppression all over the country. In fact, thanks to you, Fair Fight was able to stop the Republican-led government in Kentucky from moving 175,000 names to the inactive voter list. And today, Andy Beshear will be the next governor of Kentucky because he won by 5,086 votes. That is 175,000 people that could have been removed from the rolls, and they weren't because of Fair Fight, and the Democratic candidate won by 5,000 votes. So because we did such a good job raising the first million, Stacey Abrams has asked if we could raise a second $1 million. And, you know, we don't want to disappoint Stacey Abrams. You never do. So if you haven't pitched in yet, or you know people who would want to help, or you want to give again, let's finish out 2019 by hitting $2 million altogether. We have the first $1 million. We would love your help with the second $1 million. And to help, you can go to votesaveamerica.com/fairfight to chip in what you can. This money is needed. It is incredibly effective. Stacey Abrams has already proven that in Kentucky, and we will prove it everywhere in the country in 2020. And Dan, on that note, how are those early book sales? Are people coming through?
They are. I am sorry. I'm glad you gave me this incredible segue, because another way in which you can help Fair Fight raise money is by buying a copy of my book, Untroubling America, which is out on February 18th. And as we said last week, a portion of the proceeds of every book is going to go to Fair Fight. And I really want to sell books because I really want to help Fair Fight, and I want you to read my book. But I wanted to thank everyone who bought the book, and I want to thank you even more for the people who pre-ordered it and then shared your proof of purchase with your friends, and mainly with me, so I can sleep better at night. And I know many of you bought the book, and I'm so grateful for that. All of you have not yet bought it, but I'm sure you will. And for those of you who follow the New York Times list, you would note that the number one, do you know who it is, John, who's the number one best-selling author on the New York Times hardcover nonfiction list this week?
I sure do, Dan, because sadly I read Twitter too much, and I saw that Yashar tweeted that it was Donald Trump Jr. and his book Triggered, which is just one of the 30,000 things a day that makes me want to throw my phone across the room.
Well, in addition to being very angering to you and many others, to triggering you, if you will.
Yeah, mission accomplished.
Yeah, exactly. It's the first thing Donald Trump Jr. has ever accomplished in his life. But if you look at it carefully, there is a little dagger next to Donald Trump Jr.'s name, because what that dagger signifies is that in the course of analyzing how many books Donald Trump Jr. sold, they noticed suspicious bulk purchases of the book. And in that is a parable of the difference between conservative authors, progressive authors. Conservative politics, progressive politics is these conservative authors are often propped up by people like the RNC buying tens of thousands of copies of Donald Trump's book, other billionaires and Republican organizations doing that, while progressive authors have to do it on their own. We have the RNC because the DNC does not buy many copies of my book. Although I would appreciate it would be a terrible use of their money. They should be spending it on field organizers and things like that. So this is all to say that if you hate Donald Trump and like Stacey Abrams, buy the book. And if you don't buy the book, I will presume you love Donald Trump Jr. and hate Stacey Abrams. So these are the sort of life decisions you need to make as you are perusing Amazon or Barnes & Noble or IndieBound or all the other places you can buy the book.
Look, we don't have a bunch of Russian oligarchs buying bulk purchases of our books from Moscow. You know, see, that's a conspiracy theory, Dan. That's what they do.
I believed that story last night that 70,000 that a Russian copper company bought 70,000 copies of Donald Trump's book, and I had an entire pitch for this morning centered around that fact because it was very believable. And I did some research.
Many people are saying. Okay, let's get to the news. On Wednesday, 2 nonpartisan public servants who currently serve in Donald Trump's State Department implicated him in a bribery and extortion scheme where he'd bully the Ukrainian government into helping him rig the 2020 election. Bill Taylor, our current ambassador to Ukraine, and George Kent, the State Department's top Ukraine official, testified for about 5 hours at the first public impeachment hearing, during which Taylor offered new, very incriminating information to the House Intelligence Committee. I think we have a clip of Taylor's bombshell.
Last Friday, a member of my staff told me of events that occurred on July 26th. While Ambassador Volker and I visited the front, this member of my staff accompanied Ambassador Sondland. Ambassador Sondland met with Mr. Yermak. Following that meeting, in the presence of my staff at a restaurant, Ambassador Sondland called President Trump and told him of his meetings in Kyiv. The member of my staff could hear President Trump on the phone asking Ambassador Sondland about the investigations. Ambassador Sondland told President Trump the Ukrainians were ready to move forward. Following the call with President Trump, the member of my staff asked Ambassador Sondland what President Trump thought about Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland responded that President Trump cares more about the investigations of Biden, which Giuliani was pressing for.
Well then. All right, so we're going to get to the bombshell, but first, what did you think of the hearing overall, and how great is Bill Taylor's voice?
I would first note that when we do this, and I'm not in studio with you, I can't hear the clips. So this is always a little bit like acting in front of a green screen.
Oh, that's right. That makes sense. Oh, now look at Kyle has a pained expression on his face. Like, why can't Dan hear the clips?
Well, it's okay. Well, I mean, hopefully it doesn't suggest some sort of audio problem, but I've heard it before. So, look, I think it is important that we just take a step back from like the political analysis of the moment, the optics, the theater criticism, and even the specific substance of the allegation of what Bill Taylor and George Kent said. I mean, the United States Congress has convened impeachment hearings on the President of the United States for using taxpayer-funded military aid to extort an ally under threat from Russia to interfere in the U.S. election. Like that, regardless of whatever else happens, how this affects non-voters in Arizona, swing voters in Wisconsin, or whatever else, or however it ends, this is a day, like an important day in history, and it's significant. And it is, I think we can look back at this moment as like an important sort of crossroads for American democracy, because there was a lot at stake here beyond just how the House votes, how the Senate convenes the trial, and when it means the election. Is that this is perhaps the highest crime ever committed by a president, and it is now an inquiry has begun, and a trial will follow. And that is more important than all of the sort of Twitter machinations of the day.
Yeah, and look, Nancy Pelosi has been saying for some time now that this is sort of a sad situation we're in, and she said she's been prayerful, and she's handling this in a very somber way, and the cynical among us can say, well, she's doing that because she shouldn't appear giddy over this and like it's some political boon for Democrats. But Thinking about this last night when I was prepping for the pod, I kind of agree. Partly because, we've always had this fear and expectation, really, that at the end of the day, Republicans will acquit this president. And what that will say about our democracy and what's allowed in this country and the precedent it sets for future presidents, that it is, as long as you have the political support of your own party and you control at least some parts of the government, you can invite a foreign power to help rig a United States election. And that is a concern that the founders had from the very fucking beginning when they were at the Constitutional Convention. It is terribly alarming. The idea that a president can get a foreign power to interfere in the election, the idea that a president can target his political opponents using the vast powers of the presidency, is very sad and also very terrifying. And, I kind of thought the same thing. It wasn't like I didn't find myself excited or, wondering just about the politics. I was thinking about that,
we have, I think it's fair, really analyze the prospect of impeachment, whether it was the right decision to do it or not, and then how to proceed once that decision was made through a political lens, right? And that is sort of reverse engineering the almost certain outcome in the Senate. But as we sat there yesterday watching it's much bigger than that, right? And it's how this plays out is going to extend beyond what happens in this election. And I think it's worth just, as we're saying here, take a moment and soak that in.
So how significant is, and just on a substantive basis here, how significant do you believe Taylor's revelation about this call between Sondland and Trump, and then the conversation with Sondland, and we now know the name of the staffer, Taylor's staffer, Dave Holmes. He works at he's an embassy staffer, and he will now be testifying in a private deposition on Friday. So how significant do you think this is?
I think in terms of advancing what we know, it is not that significant. What is significant is that it is another person who can testify with firsthand knowledge of what the president said. And there was an AP report this morning that there was a second embassy staffer who also heard that call, who I imagine we'll be hearing from soon. So it does deliver a fatal blow to the already flawed hearsay defense that the Republicans have been using, because ultimately you're going to have Sondland testify next week, and Sondland has firsthand knowledge of what the president said to him and in some of these meetings. But Sondland is he is a credible witness in the sense that he is hard to paint as a deep state operative, right? He is someone who gave $1 million to Trump, but he's also someone who has already once lied/failed to recollect under oath. And so in some ways he is a imperfect witness. Having career, theoretically nonpartisan foreign service officers testify to the same thing just buttresses the Democratic case in a strong way, I think.
Yeah, I think that, look, Republicans literally get out of every single argument, leave every defense behind, and go on to a new one, and they will certainly do this here. But, in a public hearing that was on television for many hours yesterday, I think Republicans hung way too much on this hearsay defense. No one has talked to the president that we're hearing from directly. And, Gordon Sondland is going to testify next week. And Gordon Sondland is either going to perjure himself again, basically, and say that Bill Taylor, Dave Holmes, and this second embassy staffer are all lying, or Gordon Sondland is going to say that he had a direct conversation with the President of the United States and believed that the president cared more about investigating, or a sham investigation, of his political opponent than he did about any Ukraine policy or corruption in Ukraine, which is the other big argument that the Republicans are making. So Republicans aren't known to be looking around corners and planning long-term strategy here. They're just trying to get through the day. But I'm not sure the value of the hearsay argument or the value of the Trump really cares about corruption argument, and we'll talk about this in a bit, when you now have this phone call between Sondland and Trump that we're going to hear about from Sondland and from the two people who overheard the phone call.
I mean, there's a political significance to it, too, or media significance, which is the media loves something new.
Yes.
Right? Like, everything else was something that had been, was just a video version of the written deposition transcripts we had seen. Mm-hmm. And so, as we know from the Mueller report, from Mueller's testimony, in order to meet some test set by the media, you need something new. And here you had something new. Even if it didn't advance the story significantly, it was a surprise. And the surprise was incredibly important in a media assessment of a hearing, apparently, for reasons that are somewhat bizarre, but such is life.
So let's talk about how Taylor and Kent did as witnesses in general. You know, I found them very credible. Both of them started by emphasizing, you know, their sort of nonpartisan credentials. They both basically said, you know, we're not here to take a side. We have served Republican and Democratic presidents. And I think they both did a very good job of knocking down a lot of sort of the Republican nonsense arguments. You know, from Bill Taylor, you know, you heard how he believed that withholding any aid to Ukraine after it was already appropriated was crazy, not for any policy beliefs or policy reasons, but because the State Department wanted to give the aid, the Defense Department wanted to give the aid, every expert and nonpartisan official working in the federal government, with the exception of maybe Donald Trump and Gordon Sondland and Mick Mulvaney, wanted the aid to be released. So he talked about that. He talked about how no president has ever conditioned foreign aid on a personal or political favor. So this is not the normal course of business, which is, you know, what people might think, oh, there's corruption all the time. Presidents are doing personal favors for them. Presidents are trying to get political favors all the time. That's what foreign policy is. That's what domestic policy is. When you're president, you try to help yourself. Bill Taylor said, no, that's never been done before. And I also think Taylor made the point that, Trump wanted President Zelensky, to do this in public. If he really cared about corruption, if he really cared about Burisma's corruption, you know, he could have had Zelensky or could have asked Zelensky, it still would have been fucking wrong and probably impeachable, to conduct some private investigation. But all he wanted was for him to go on CNN and make a public statement that they were investigating Joe Biden. That's what he wanted. So I thought that Taylor was really effective. What did you think? And what did you think of George Kent?
I thought they were both excellent. They're the people, for all the discussion of, you know, how terrible Washington is and politics sucks. What they are like, I've never met Bill Taylor or George Kent, but we have met people like them throughout the government, right?
Yes.
Career, nonpartisan public servants who view it as their life's calling to serve the United States, regardless of who is president. We know those people are in the Foreign Service, they're in the military, they're in the intelligence agency, they're in domestic agencies like HHS or the Interior Department, who are just trying to do the right thing. And that appears to be who they are. That's how they testified. They were very believable and serious and didn't give in to anyone's partisan instincts, right? Whether it was the Republicans trying to get them to, you know, sort of validate a conspiracy theory, or Democrats trying to get them to make assessments about the impeachability of Donald Trump's conduct. They only testified to what they had seen and what they knew and what their experience was, and didn't make proclamations beyond what they were supposed to do. And in that way, I thought they were incredible witnesses.
Yeah, I don't know if people necessarily understand that when you work in the White House or when you work for an administration, just how many people you work with on a daily basis do not necessarily share your partisan politics. And it's not necessarily that they share, you know, the other side's politics, but they truly are nonpartisan, almost apolitical public servants who sometimes, when those of us who are on the campaign are all shooting the shit about politics, and or people who'd worked in other administrations like the Clinton administration, you know, we're all talking politics, and there's a whole bunch of people who are bureaucrats in the government, who are public servants, who just don't participate in that. And when they work with you, you can tell how nonpartisan they are, because their job is to serve in government, and they don't see their job as to take sides in partisan politics. And those are all the people that we're hearing from through the course of this impeachment hearing, by and large. I also thought that George Kent was very effective. George Kent in his opening statement sort of talked about, preempted one of the lines of attack from Republicans, which is, way back when George Kent did say something to the vice president's office like, hey, Hunter Biden's on this board. I'm a little worried about the appearance of a conflict of interest here. So, George Kent did sort of raise his concerns about that. But then in the next breath, Kent says, but what Joe Biden did in firing that prosecutor was 100% correct. It was the position of the entire United States government. It was the position of most of the world, except for corrupt people in Ukraine. And in fact, by Joe Biden, by firing that prosecutor, increased the chances that a new non-corrupt prosecutor would look into Burisma. And so, I think George Kent was very effective in knocking down this conspiracy that Joe Biden did anything wrong with regard to Ukraine. It's not just like, and a lot of reports say this, there's no factual evidence that Joe Biden did anything wrong. No. It is like Joe Biden did the right thing in Ukraine. You can comment on whether Hunter Biden did the right thing by joining the board, whether it was an appearance of conflict of interest, all that kind of stuff. But Joe Biden in firing that prosecutor was 100% correct, and I thought George Kent was very effective in making that point.
It seems like the Republicans spent less time on Biden than I would have expected.
Yeah.
In part because I think maybe the way George Kent handled that at the beginning.
Yes, I agree with that. All right, let's talk about how the Democrats on the Intelligence Committee handled the hearing, starting with Chairman Adam Schiff, who gave a pretty powerful opening statement. Let's play a clip of that.
The issue that we confront is the one posed by the president's acting chief of staff when he challenged Americans to get over it. If we find that the president of the United States abused his power and invited foreign interference in our elections, or if he sought to condition, coerce, extort, or bribe an ally into conducting investigations to aid his reelection campaign and did so by withholding official acts, a White House meeting, or hundreds of millions of dollars of needed military aid, must we simply get over it? Is this what Americans should now expect from their president? If this is not impeachable conduct, what is?
If this is not impeachable conduct, what is? I thought that was maybe the most powerful line from Schiff. How do you think Schiff did overall in the hearing?
Flawless. I thought Schiff and all of the Democrats did everything I could have hoped that they would do.
Yeah.
Their arguments were clear. They handled it with the seriousness that the occasion deserved. They did not get drawn into Jim Jordan-style absurdities or get pulled into the mud or look like they were preening for the cameras in their questions. The division of topics among the members was everyone sort of hit a different thing. It wasn't just everyone doing the same thing. People asked questions as opposed to give speeches. I thought they did a truly phenomenal job. And we have been always critical of Democrats at hearings, and
yeah,
I couldn't have asked for. I really was incredibly impressed with them.
I feel the same way, and you guys all know we've been critical of Pelosi in the past, of hearings in the past. We've been pretty honest about that the Mueller hearing was not the blockbuster that we all hoped for. I think that was more Mueller's fault than the Democrats on the committee, but so be it. But I do think that, Adam Schiff and the Democrats handled yesterday with the seriousness it deserves, with the seriousness that the American people hopefully expect. And it was, I don't think that was easy, especially when, you saw moments when Republicans on the committee tried to turn it into a circus, tried to drag Adam Schiff into their bullshit so that they would say something crazy and then maybe he would get upset and they would get in a fight and they could say, oh, look, it's a partisan food fight. And he just refused. And when they wanted to enter something crazy into the record, he just said, sure, enter it into the record. And I thought that his demeanor was very effective. And I think this is important to say because as we move forward, and Republicans continue to act more like Jim Jordan and start screaming and yelling and turning this into a circus, I guarantee there will be pundits who say, Adam Schiff's got to fight back. Adam Schiff's being too passive and too calm, and he's got to show some fight and stuff like that. He should not. He should not, because this is not about winning a food fight with the Republicans on the committee. That's not what people watching want to see happen. This is about making the best case possible and making them look like they're the partisan political ones, and the Democrats are the ones who care about this violation of the president's oath of office. All right, let's talk about how... So, I'm sorry, let's try this again. What did you think about the Democratic strategy overall, not just the demeanor? Like, do you think the Democrats made an effective case with what they had to work with?
I do. I think that it was smart to start with two objectively unimpeachable witnesses, nonpartisan career public servants, who could speak to both the facts of what happened and the geopolitical consequences of Trump and Giuliani's shenanigans. I thought that was very important. It sets the stage of getting into the broader hearings next week and talking to people like Sondland and others. So I thought they were very good witnesses to start with. I thought it was the predicate, like you want to set a predicate for what is to come, and I thought they did that.
So let's talk about how the Republicans handled the hearing, starting with the Intel Committee's ranking member, Devin Nunes, who opened with a rambling series of conspiracy theories that resembled a Sean Hannity monologue, including one... Well, we should just play the clip here. This is what Devin Nunes said during his opening statement.
We should forget about them reading fabrications of Trump-Russia collusion from the Steele dossier into the congressional record. We should also forget about them trying to obtain nude pictures of Trump from Russian pranksters who pretended to be Ukrainian officials. We should forget about them leaking a false story to CNN while he was still testifying to our committee, claiming that Donald Trump Jr. was colluding with WikiLeaks. And forget about countless other deceptions, large and small, that make them the last people on earth with the credibility to hurl more preposterous accusations at their political opponents.
Dan, you and I pay pretty close attention to the news. We pay pretty close attention to the various right-wing conspiracy theories that sort of float through the ether on the internet. I have to admit, I have not heard about the one where the Democrats tried to get nude pictures of Donald Trump. What was that?
I don't know what to say. I do not know what to say. I do not want to see those. I do not. No one does. America deserves better than that.
I mean, I thought it was so fascinating watching Devin Nunes do this routine, because my first thought was, if you do not spend time watching Fox News or trafficking in, 8chan, 4chan conspiracy theories, listening to InfoWars or Ben Shapiro or whatever, you would think that they were speaking in a foreign language on that committee, because the list of things that he ran through were crazy town. I don't know how it's effective. I mean, I know how it's effective in keeping their base and the Fox News watchers angry and uptight, and, he's playing all the hits, but doesn't seem like it's effective beyond that, but who knows? I don't know. What do you think?
My takeaway from Nunes' performance, and then also what we would see from Jim Jordan and a few others later, was the Republicans are much more interested in persuading Trump of their loyalty to him than persuading the American people of Trump's innocence. And I think that says everything about the current state of Republican politics, which is they're much more afraid of angering Trump, getting primaried, and losing their job than they are actually doing the right thing, or even thinking in some sort of strategy about how you would handle this in a way that minimized damage to the party writ large, right? There's like this massive prisoner's dilemma problem for all the Republicans, and that's a very apt term, I think, in terms of how they handle this, is that they're dealing with their own politics, not what is best for the party. And every one of them is doing that.
Now, Republicans made this big show of, we don't have anyone on the Intel Committee that can really be, the best defender of Donald Trump, which tough for Devin Nunes. And so they removed a member of the Intel Committee and replaced that person with Jim Jordan, who was supposed to be the hero of the day, who was going to defend Donald Trump. How do you think Jim Jordan did?
I think he did exactly what he was supposed to do, which was make Donald Trump feel better about himself.
Yeah.
Right. He is basically just a obnoxious, not too bright security blanket for Donald Trump. And Donald Trump feels better if there's, because Jim Jordan is basically like low rent Hannity, right? And so, and that like that's his future.
Yeah.
And so that made Trump feel better. I don't know that he did anything like he did better than Devin Nunes, sure, but I mean,
he yelled a lot.
Who doesn't? Right. He yelled a lot, which is what Trump wants to hear, right? And frankly, it's what some Republicans want to hear. It's basically how
the Brett Kavanaugh
got to be got on the Supreme Court was by screaming at everyone.
That was my first thought when I listened to Jordan. I was like, oh, this is their Brett Kavanaugh, Lindsey Graham. If we're, losing the argument, if we can just scream about how we're aggrieved and Donald Trump's a victim, if we can yell loud enough, then it's going to work. And of course, it did work for them in the Kavanaugh hearings. And, Devin Nunes' approach was to basically read off 13 conspiracy theories to Bill Taylor and say, have you heard of that? Have you heard of that? And I don't think that was quite effective. And, then you saw Republicans like Will Hurd, who are traditionally more moderate, but has clearly bought into a lot of the bullshit during this impeachment hearing, try to sort of lay out a more constructed argument about why Trump might be innocent of this. And as I'm watching all that and then listening to Jim Jordan sound like a fucking auctioneer screaming as fast as he can and yelling, I was thinking this is probably where this is going to go in the coming weeks. They are quickly going to lose patience, some of these Republicans, and if they feel cornered, are just going to start yelling and screaming to get through it.
Yeah, I mean, you can expect a walkout. You can all kinds of absurdities to try to blow up the process for sure.
Yeah, Matt Gaetz barging into the room riding an elephant. There was one moment with Jim Jordan yelling where I thought Peter Welch, one of the Peter Welch, one of the Democratic members on the Intel Committee, had a great retort. Let's play that clip.
Now there is one witness that they won't bring in front of us. They won't bring in front of the American people. And that's the guy who started it all, the whistleblower.
Thank you. I say to my colleague, I'd be glad to have the person who started it all come in and testify. President Trump is welcome to take a seat right there.
What a line from Peter Welch. He got the biggest laugh of the day. Donald Trump should come sit down and testify. But I thought it was, it sort of revealed the absurdity of the Republican focus on the whistleblower, whose account has been corroborated by numerous witnesses and hasn't been challenged successfully by any witnesses or any evidence, and the idea that Donald Trump is hiding from testifying and did in the Mueller case as well. And he's also preventing critical witnesses like John Bolton and Mick Mulvaney and everyone else from testifying.
Or even the notes of the people who were testifying that day.
Right.
That was the big point about, George Kent wrote that memo to file, and he turned it into the State Department to be responsive to the subpoena, and Mike Pompeo is sitting on it. But, I also think that Peter Welch's comment was quite funny, and apropos and goes to the heart of it. Also goes to how dumb Jim Jordan is, which is he just walked right into that and had no idea he was doing it.
What did you think of the two lawyers who, on the Democratic side and the Republican side, who were, Schiff and Nunes sort of deputized to ask a bunch of questions during their 45-minute time?
I thought Dan Goldman the Democrat was phenomenal. He knew exactly what he was doing. He asked the questions. He had a plan. He executed the plan. The Republican attorney was terrible. In a city of 1 million attorneys, that's the guy they got. It says a lot about how few people wanted that job.
Yeah. Had a series of... I don't know if he was directed by the Republicans to ask all these topics, and he probably didn't know how to wade through all the conspiracies or what, but it was sort of like a rambling series of questions. He always had like a weird constipated look on his face. It was very bizarre. During the questioning, even some of Donald Trump's most fervent supporters, like former White House press secretary Ari Fleischer, was like on Twitter, "What is this guy doing? This is not effective." One Republican operative told Bloomberg's Sahil Kapoor, quote, "This is a massive fucking shit show. No one wants to be here." So, you'll hear a lot of spin from Republicans today that it was wonderful and boring, and Democrats had a rough time and all that kind of shit. But during the hearing, I don't think they were that excited.
No, he did a terrible job. And it just sort of, the fact that he had 45 minutes of question time, but he didn't really have 45 minutes of things to say, sort of bespeaks the weakness of the Republican argument. We even saw that with some of the members with their 5 minutes, would ask a couple of, like the non-Jim Jordan types, would sort of ask a couple of questions and then just give up and yield their time back, because there's nothing, like the conduct is indefensible, right? Like it's just a question of how much shame you're willing to bathe in during to defend Trump, but it's not. It's like there's no substantive argument to make here.
Yeah, and the answer to that is like a full sensory deprivation tank of shame. Is how much they're willing to bathe in. What did you think of the media reaction to the theater criticism, if you will, of the hearing yesterday?
Well, I think we should start with the fact that the overwhelming majority of the coverage, I think, was fair and objective and as serious as the moment demanded.
I agree.
And I am sympathetic to the sort of the quote media writ large here, which is their performance is often defined by not the work they do or the majority of the work that is done, but by the worst examples of their work, right? So there were two stories that inflamed the world, one by Jeff Mason of Reuters and one by Jonathan Allen of NBC News, that people were very mad about. We were mad about them.
Yeah, let me. I'll read the headlines just for people to know why we were so annoyed. Reuters headline was "Consequential but dull. Trump impeachment hearings begin without a bang," and the lead was "Democratic lawmakers tried their hand at reality television with mixed results on Wednesday." That's Reuters. And here's the NBC piece from Jonathan Allen, which, in fairness, NBC was one piece of analysis out of a lot of coverage from NBC that was not this. Quote, "The first two witnesses called Wednesday testified to President Trump's scheme, but lacked the pizzazz necessary to capture the public attention." Whew. All right, Dan, go ahead.
The thing you read from Jeff Mason is one of the worst things that I've ever heard in my life. And I will. The caveat I'll give to that is, you and I have known Jeff Mason for over a decade. He covered Obama's White House. He is 99% of the time a very good, very straightforward wire reporter. And so, people are very upset about this piece. They should be upset about this piece, but I do not think it is indicative of Jeff Mason's work, right? I mean, there are reporters and analysts who often lean into these tropes and are sort of famous for them. I don't think Jeff is one of those people. And so, that's the perspective I would offer of having worked with him for a long time. I thought there was a really interesting conversation on Twitter between two critics at the Times, James Poniewozik and A.O. Scott, where they talked about the value of television criticism of big TV moments, right? And I think that is very true. It is a television moment, right?
It is.
Millions of Americans watched it, right? Just like a State of the Union or inauguration or, the Mueller testimony or whatever it is. And I often very much enjoy the pieces written by TV critics about those things. People like James Poniewozik or Emily Nussbaum or Alan Sepinwall, really great writers who analyze it from the perspective of television. But that is a job for television critics, right? It would be annoying if James Poniewozik was covering day-to-day politics, but he has an expertise in television criticism, so he's doing it. And so the point of what A.O. Scott was saying is criticism is is an art, right? It's something you do, and it should be left to the people who do it for a living. And so the political reporter should cover the politics and the substance and the legality and all of what is happening. And we want to hear from trained television critics about the television aspect of it. I think that's an interesting and important component of it.
Yeah. I mean, look, we cover, hopefully, the substance of every political issue we talk about on the show. And then we also cover the politics, and we do political analysis, and we talk about optics on the show. And you and I wish that we didn't have to, and we complained about it the entire time we were in the White House. But I remember last week, before these hearings started, I was giving advice to Democrats and saying, remember, this will be judged as a show, what kind of show you put on. It should be choreographed. This is about trying to persuade the public. And so you do have to think about these things. So I don't think there's inherently a problem, or at least it's a necessity in the television age that we live in, to talk about sort of the performance of various political players, since this is about affecting public opinion. That's not necessarily my big problem with this. The problem is, but lacked the pizzazz necessary to capture the public attention. How do you know that? There are no polls. There is no data. How do you know, Jeff Mason, the Democratic lawmakers tried their hand at reality television with mixed results? No one knows this yet, right? Like, you and I thought the Democrats did a fantastic job and that it was choreographed really well. Other people might disagree with us. In about a week, we'll have some polls that say that one way or the other. But the idea that reporters, or some reporters, a minority of reporters in this instance, believe that it is their job to preempt public opinion by offering their own opinion of whether the testimony was effective or not, bothers me, because it's also something that reporters do where it's like, we are all in this bubble together. Those of us who pay attention to politics a lot, reporters, political people, pundits, like, we know all this information. We've heard it all before, except for, of course, the Taylor bombshell, which I thought would prevent anyone from writing this bullshit, because we heard something very new at the hearing. But because we all know this a lot, and reporters are covering this every day, obviously they get bored by it after a while, because they're trafficking in this bullshit all the time, right? But what about the average voter, the average American who's walking around, who doesn't pay attention to the news that much, and they think, okay, there was a big impeachment hearing yesterday. I want to find out what happened, because I didn't have time to watch it. So they go on their computers and they go on their phones and they see an NBC piece and it says it lacked the pizzazz necessary to capture the public attention. Like, if I were someone just watching that, I'd be like, well, I'm the public. Why did you just make that judgment about me? I didn't even get to read the facts yet. I didn't even get to watch it for myself. And I don't think that some reporters realize that they, by writing that stuff, are shaping public opinion. And who are they to shape public opinion just based on their own personal opinion and not report the substance of the hearing, and also maybe do political analysis based on facts, data, experience in politics, experience in media, right? Like, just give us something besides a poorly formed opinion right off the bat.
Yeah, it is both presuming a reaction and then influencing that reaction by that presumption.
Yes, it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if a bunch of people continue to read that the hearings were boring, people will think the hearings are boring. This is what happens. And when you argue with reporters about this, as we have done in the past, what they will tell you is, well, I'm just one person. Who's going to read my blog, or who's going to read my piece, or whatever? But these things add up. You write for outlets that are, go far and wide, and there's a responsibility that comes with that. And again, I completely agree with your opening point here, which is, until I saw those two pieces last night, and they went around on our Slack channel, I said to myself, wow, I'm really proud of the media and how they've covered this. I think they've covered this in a serious, substantive way. And I almost didn't even want to tweet about these two pieces, because one of the things that happens in this age is this is the algorithms that you've talked about in Facebook too. The things that piss people off the most, that enrage people the most, are what gets shared the most. And now I fear that so many people will be like, oh, the impeachment hearings were covered as boring by a bunch of people, so that must be a problem. So I almost didn't even want to lift these pieces up, but because we have a long way to go and many weeks to go, I think, it should be, it's a brushback pitch to the rest of the media.
And I thought, and frankly, this is something I thought that was rare about this, was a lot of reporters were critical of those takes, right? It's not just those two pieces, but just anything that sort of had that sort of TV assessment from a political reporter, and
which is progress.
Like we did the thing that I warned about, which is we took the two worst pieces and we used to define everything. I was like, most people did a really great job. I wrote the outline in the middle of the hearing yesterday, and I put one of the items in there was was our reaction to the media coverage of this, and my presumption was it would be largely infuriating, and it actually wasn't, right?
Yeah.
And then hopefully what we're trying to do is explain the outrage, ours and on Twitter, about those pieces, and acknowledge that most people did. The overwhelming majority of the coverage, I thought, was serious, took this very seriously. I thought that's important.
Yeah, and I do think, one thing I worry about is, as I mentioned, I think Taylor's revelation sort of drove a lot of the coverage, because if reporters can write about something new, then they don't necessarily write about all the theater criticism stuff. And so, I do have a concern that as the testimony continues into next week, if each witness doesn't have a Bill Taylor-like bombshell, then we will devolve into sort of the worst of the coverage that we were just complaining about. So I do have that fear. And look, I have a bigger anxiety, which is this is still seen as a test by too many in the media as, can Democrats persuade Republicans to do the right thing? And I think that, Democrats would probably do themselves some good by setting expectations now that we do not see our job here. Democrats on that committee do not see their job as trying to persuade Republican members of Congress to do the right thing and vote their conscience. That's for the Republicans to do. What the Democrats are trying to do is lay out a case to the American people about why the president has betrayed his oath of office. And if Republicans agree with that he betrayed his, then please join us in voting that way. If you don't, then that's telling to the American people, and they should vote accordingly in 2020. That should be our goal. I think this whole idea is if Democrats can convince a couple of Republicans to vote with them, they win. And if Republicans can maintain partisan unity, they win. I think we have to get out of that frame.
We have already convinced a Republican. His name is Justin Amash.
Right.
He was forced to leave the party because of it. It's actually an impossible situation. You can't convince Republicans. If the Republican agrees with you, they are forced to leave the party. So it is going to be a partisan vote. It's a question of whether there'll be other independents like Justin Amash. So
yeah,
we cannot allow a test to be set up that Democrats are destined to fail.
So what comes next week, and what is Wednesday's testimony change, if anything?
Well, I think it really puts the onus even more so on Gordon Sondland's testimony. That is, I think, the most interesting and compelling, and be the hardest to. I think that in terms of what people are looking for, what's new and what's different, that will be the one. We have a parade of other nonpartisan career officials who are going to come in and speak to what we already know and corroborate things that were in the call transcripts, were in the depositions, were in Mick Mulvaney's national television announcement of crimes. But Gordon Sondland is the one who spoke directly to the president, who we will hear from.
Yeah, I also think that I don't think there's going to be a moment that is, even if there are other developments, other bombshells, that is going to instantly change public opinion here. I think this is something that's just going to build and build and build. And so, I would even be wary of polls that come out in a couple days, polls that come out next week. I think what I hope will happen here is, as witness after witness testifies the same thing, as they corroborate each other's testimony, as you see this parade of nonpartisan officials, then the cumulative effect of all of this testimony will be powerful and compelling, but it will take time, it will take repetition, and I don't think we should ever expect anything to change overnight, and possibly at all. I mean, look, we've said this too. Our own polling right before the hearing started showed 94% of Democratic leaning voters for impeachment and 94% of Republican leaning voters against. And there was like 2% that hadn't made up their mind. So, we live in a polarized environment, and that's that. And there's nothing much we can do about that right now. But I feel, look, I would be upset and anxious if I think Democrats didn't do a great job, if we didn't have all the facts on our side, right? Like if most of the media looked like those two pieces, I'd be upset. But I think the Democrats are doing everything they can possibly do. They're taking it seriously. We have very compelling evidence, and testimony from nonpartisan people. There's nothing else we can do. And I'm glad we're doing this because, as we said at the top, this is that important. It really does rise above partisan politics, or at least it should, because it is a very scary, serious moment for the country. And no matter what happens, I'm glad the Democrats have pursued this. Okay, Dan, let's turn to 2020, and let's start by talking about one logistical way that impeachment may affect the Democratic primary. If the House votes to impeach Trump, Mitch McConnell has committed to holding a Senate trial, which he has reportedly told his colleagues may begin right around Thanksgiving. Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Richard Burr suggested the trial may take 6 to 8 weeks, though leadership sources close to McConnell disputed that. But whenever the trial is, and however long it takes, 6 Democratic presidential candidates would be forced off the campaign trail to serve as jurors. Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar, and Michael Bennet. Dan, how much of a political problem for them is this as they are trying to run their campaigns?
It is a political problem for sure. The place where you want to be in January is Iowa. You want to be spending the bulk of your time in Iowa, organizing caucus goers, building up your volunteer network, and recruiting precinct captains. That is the best way to win Iowa. You want to spend some time in the other 3 early states as well. And if you were in Washington, you were not doing any of those things. I'm sure there are ways to, go Thursday night to Monday morning and be in Iowa, but you're going to be at a decided disadvantage to Pete Buttigieg, Joe Biden. Am I missing other frontrunners? But yeah, primarily those 2 frontrunners in Iowa, and anyone else Andrew Yang, who have the time to just camp out in Iowa. And so that's problematic. The challenge for the other contenders who are not senators is it is likely that the bulk of the political conversation is going to be on the impeachment trial.
Yeah.
That is who is going to be on TV. That is who is going to be talked about on social media. That is who is going to have the opportunity for viral moments. And one of the things we've seen in this primary to date is when candidates are part of that conversation, they do quite well. And when they get relegated to being outside of that conversation, they often drop pretty quickly. You saw with Pete Buttigieg, right? He was a big part of the conversation. He moved up really quickly in the polls. Then he sort of fell out of it as he sort of plateaued and kind of went back down to being in the lower tier, and then had a good debate performance and several good media cycles and has built his way back up to being a top-tier candidate. Same thing with look at Beto. Beto gets in, raises a bunch of money, a lot of excitement, falls out of the conversation and drops. And then once you're out of the conversation, getting back in is very, very hard. So there are upsides and downsides to this, but I think for the campaign managers of any of these candidates would prefer their candidate be in Iowa. And I'm also pretty sure McConnell's doing this just to fuck with them because he's one of those people who just wants to see the world burn.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. I mean, yeah, I'm sort of torn on this one, right? Obviously, you want to be on the ground in Iowa, New Hampshire, and meeting voters, right? That still matters. But I am also aware that we are in the media political environment that you just described, which is, this race is much more nationalized than ever before. Even in some of these early states, people are receiving information about the candidates through the national news and social media, and maybe not as much as they used to in person. And look, we're not going to get any viral moments from these senators who were jurors during the impeachment trial because the senators aren't supposed to say anything. But during the breaks, after the day is over of the impeachment, each day of the impeachment trial, all of these senators will be all over Rachel Maddow and Chris Hayes and CNN and all of these different shows, and they'll have a lot of media opportunities to talk about the trial and talk about what they just saw. Now, will they be talking about what they want to talk about, which is healthcare and wages and all the issues they would have been talking about if they were on the ground in Iowa and New Hampshire, where they're not talking about impeachment at all? Probably not. Probably in those interviews, they're going to have to be talking about impeachment, which I'm sure they don't want to talk about a ton. So I do think it's mixed. It's mixed for these candidates.
I think the candidate among the senators who has the biggest opportunity here is Kamala Harris.
Right. I agree with that.
I mean, even though she is a juror in this case and is not going to be prosecuting the case, she is always at her best when she gets to highlight her prosecutorial skills. And that is, I'm not speaking about her criminal justice reform record. I am talking about the instances where she is questioning Bill Barr, or questioning Brett Kavanaugh, or speaking to that, because that has been, with obviously limited success to date, a proxy for her electability cases. That she is the person who can take Trump down on the debate stage, and there is an opportunity here for her to highlight that, to take that part of her bio and make it a asset, and really an opportunity to, I don't want to use the term resuscitate, but to, sort of build back the momentum she has lost and get back into the top tier in time to make an impact in the campaign.
Yeah, and I think to that extent, Amy Klobuchar serves on the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Thing, yeah.
And was a prosecutor. And I think especially for Klobuchar and Booker, who've had a harder time, and Bennett to an extent, who've had a harder time getting any attention from media at all nationally, I think this will help them get some attention. I think for Warren, she was out very early for impeachment and made it a big deal, so that's good for her. I would bet that of all those folks, Bernie is probably the most annoyed because Bernie doesn't love talking about impeachment. He has a message that's very different than that, and his campaign is big on organizing, and he loves doing rallies, and so I would imagine that he's probably one of the more annoyed candidates that he has to go do this.
Yep, I think that's right.
So as we mentioned, one person who will not be stuck in Washington is Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who has seen some pretty good polls lately. On Tuesday, Monmouth University, a great pollster, published a poll of likely Iowa Democratic caucus goers that had Pete leading at 22%. This is the first poll that Pete has led in Iowa. He was followed by Biden at 19%, Warren at 18%, and Bernie at 13%. Buttigieg gained 14 points since Monmouth's last Iowa poll in August. Dan, what do you attribute this to?
I mean, he's been riding a wave. He really has. And we should just put this caveat on this conversation that I just saw the Des Moines Register has a new poll coming out Saturday night.
Oh, boy.
So that will be the one. Right. If he is leading that poll, that's the starting gun goes off. But Nate Silver had an interesting take on this, which is everyone is sort of working back, like Pete's rise, which is happening in Iowa, it's happening in national polls, it's happening in other early state polls we've seen, at least New Hampshire, not so much the more diverse states in the primary calendar yet. But a lot of people are attributing that to his last debate performance, whatever that was a few weeks ago, which I think we all believe was a very good performance. But like what Nate Silver pointed out was something like Pete Buttigieg gained a point maybe in the polls taken right afterwards, but he has managed to engineer a media cycle about his surging, and there's a self-perpetuating element to that is, he has been every time you take the paper, it's like Pete Buttigieg in the catbird seat in Iowa, Pete Buttigieg surging, and and he is definitely drawing the crowds that suggest a surge. So it's not made up of whole cloth, but he's ridden a very favorable media wave that is happening at the same time about questions about the electability or viability of the frontrunners, none of which we fully understand how to interpret or take seriously. But at a question when Democrats he has managed to leverage a favorable media cycle and a desire for a quote unquote more electable alternative among some, I don't know who, to get to the to get to the top. And the question is, did he get there too soon?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Nate's point is right about the debate. I also think this is sort of the result of a slow build in Iowa that comes from having an excellent organization there and having been on television there. He spent a lot of money on television in Iowa. And, I remember months ago when Tommy was in Iowa for his Iowa show that will be first episode dropping next week. And he was texting us and he's like, I'm at this Pete event at a place in Iowa where usually you don't get that many people, and there are tons and tons of people here. And so Pete's crowds have sort of predated in Iowa at least, have predated some of that debate where he did pretty well. And I think this is the case in Iowa. I think this is the same with Elizabeth Warren. It was sort of a slow rise for her in Iowa, right? Like when you have a really good organization in Iowa, if you can get on the air and you can spend a lot of time there talking to people, if you have the right message, then it can pay off. And I think, we saw this during the JJ, or now the LJ dinner, that the two people with pretty distinct messages were Elizabeth Warren, her message about the need to fight for big structural change, and Pete Buttigieg, which is much more of a we need to fight, but we also need to come together, and this sort of hunger among the electorate for unity and the end of, perpetual political warfare, which is, along with Elizabeth Warren's message, also a potent message. And so it'll be interesting to see. But you're right. Like, I don't know if he's peaked too soon either. And I imagine that in the next debate next week, he will probably be the target of, he'll probably take some fire.
Yeah, I mean, for some time perspective, Pete's rise here is about 12 years to the week of Obama's rise in Iowa in 2007 when he surged to the front. The challenge for Pete is the Iowa caucus is 1 month later in 2020 than it was in 2008. It was January 3rd when Obama won and February 3rd now. And I remember, when we were working for Obama, we were like hanging on for dear life to find ways to sustain our momentum, to just get to caucus day before, you sort of have, because the narrative always turns after too long.
Yep.
And that was challenging. And there were some actual scary days where we thought our poll numbers were dropping right before the Christmas holiday. And so Pete has a real task in front of him, in front of his campaign to keep that momentum up and survive a large number of debates. I think we had one debate between Obama's surge and the actual Iowa caucus. Maybe two at most. He has at least November, at least December, and possibly, I don't know how many, but there's at least one and perhaps more in January. So he has a gauntlet to ride to get to caucus day.
Yeah, and the other challenge he has is this stat from that Monmouth poll. Fewer than 1/3 of likely caucus goers in Iowa say that they are set on their candidate. Fewer than 1/3. And most would not be disappointed to switch their support to another candidate before the first in the nation caucuses take place on February 3rd. That's a lot of people who haven't definitely made up their minds yet. And I think that is maybe one contributing factor to some of these other candidates jumping in the race, which is the last thing we'll talk about here. We have yet another candidate who has entered the Democratic primary. Former two-term governor of Massachusetts, Deval Patrick, jumped into the race today, Thursday, saying that this campaign is not just about the character of the candidates, but the character of the country. In an interview, he also said, quote, we seem to be migrating to, on the one camp, sort of nostalgia. Let's just get rid of, if you will, the incumbent president, and we can go back to doing what we used to do. Or it's our way, our big idea, or no way. Neither of those, it seems to me, seizes the moment to pull the nation together and bring some humility. So, Dan, this is a reversal of his 2018 announcement that he wouldn't be running for president. Why do you think he changed his mind?
I mean, I don't know. I have to be honest with you. Look, Deval Patrick is someone that we have worked with. He's been on this podcast. He's someone who, as a person, we really like, and whose political talent we genuinely admire. I think he's one of the most talented orators in the Democratic Party, full stop. And I think I have often thought that if he had run in 2016, he could have won the Democratic nomination. And if he had gotten in at the beginning, then he, I think, could have been a major factor in this race. And I'm curious about this, and I want to hear more from him and for whoever ends up working for him as to what they view their path to be. Because the one thing we know about Deval Patrick is he is not someone who has some chemical need to be president. He is not filling some need for attention or fulfillment in himself, right? That's just not who he is. And so, and he doesn't, at least in my experience, he's very politically savvy. So it's not like he would just jump at something without a plan. So I want to hear what the plan is. What is his plan to get on the debate stage, right? Because you have to get to 200,000 donors to be on the debate stage. And candidates who have been running for almost a year are just barely getting to that number. People like Booker, and I think Booker just got there like in the last week or so. And so how is Deval Patrick going to get there? I see the logic in the lane he is going for. I'm just not sure how he's going to get the attention and money it takes to be in that lane.
Yeah, I mean, look, I feel the same way. I love Deval Patrick. I've known him for, like you have, for a very long time, and I think he's not just a brilliant orator. And like you said, there's some speeches he gives that I think, surpass Obama's. I really think he is that gifted.
Which is why you plagiarized.
It's why I plagiarized, right? It is. You can all go look that up. But it's not just his oratory either. I mean, Deval has this story. He grew up poor on the south side of Chicago, in poverty with a single mom. Worked his way out of poverty, got great education, 2-term governor of Massachusetts. A really strong record in Massachusetts. Also, some things in the record that are more controversial from a management standpoint, but, in terms of policy wins, he had quite a few as a 2-term governor of Massachusetts. And then he has a business record where he is running the social impact fund at Bain, which it's social impact, so that's good, but it's Bain, so not so good. And he has some other, business ties that'll surely come up. But one of the reasons I've always liked Deval is, like Barack Obama, like Beto O'Rourke, there is a real disdain for the bullshit of politics and the game of politics, and there's a distance from, like, these are not people who follow every twist of every narrative or are looking at all their comments on social media, right? And so I hope he's not doing. Yeah, exactly. So there is what I believe is a healthy disdain for politics, and like you said, there is not this like driving ego and need to be affirmed by getting votes, right? It is I want to do this because I think it's the right thing to do. But the downside of having that disdain for politics is you can hate the game of politics so much that you don't put enough thought into how you are going to play it and win it. I think our old boss, even though he didn't like the game of politics that much, understood, he was competitive enough, and he understood, I need a plan and a strategy to win. I need to put it in place. I need to have the right people. Like, he had all that. Beto O'Rourke did not have that. Right? He did not think hard enough about how he was going to win or what his message was. And I'm with you. I think if Deval had announced early on, I think he would have been a formidable contender. At this late stage, watching the primary as we have, I wonder, how are you going to get the media attention? Like, what are you going to, what policy are you going to propose that we haven't heard yet? What message are you going to deliver that we haven't heard yet? Like you said, how do you get on the debate stage, right? Like, he's already missed filing deadlines in Alabama and Arkansas, right? And so, I think and he acknowledged this in his interviews today, that it's going to be a really tough path. But I'm very curious about this one. I'm very curious about why he decided to do this and what his plan is, because it's a bit of a mystery.
The only thing I'd say to all the people who are mad that he's getting in the race is anyone can run, right? We're at the point where the voters will decide, right? If there is some giant appetite for Deval Patrick or Michael Bloomberg, for instance, then they will get the donors and the polling support to get on the debate stage. And if there is not, they won't. And it's not going to come at the cost of anyone else. Someone can make an argument that Bloomberg could be spending his money on something else as they can with Steyer. And ultimately, that's the choice that Bloomberg and Steyer make. And you have to analyze that in the context of all the money they spent on all kinds of other good things to help Democrats and progressive issues. But if he wants to run, he can run. I think that's true of Bloomberg. It's true of Deval. It's true of anyone else who wants to get in. And then the voters will decide. It doesn't affect the other people. Voters have agency here.
I am so over like the Twitter fury every time someone jumps in the race. Like who cares? Like you said, like everyone can run in the Democratic primary. If you are good, you will win. If not, you won't. That's how this works, right? Like we were upset by one person who thought that who decided that they were going to get into the race, and that was Howard Schultz, because he was going to run as a third-party candidate, run as an independent, and potentially tip the election to Donald Trump. It was incredibly dangerous for Howard Schultz to think about entering the race. And we said at the time, if Howard Schultz was running as a Democrat, we wouldn't be nearly as angry. And, you know, that's how I felt about Tom Steyer jumping in the race. That's how I felt about Mike Bloomberg jumping in the race. That's how I feel about Deval Patrick jumping into the race, right? Like, I just don't see any of this as cause for alarm or, you know, incredible disdain for these people. Like, let's let people run and you know, and also, if you're one of the candidates who's in the lead, who's not one of these people, it really will make you a better candidate to hear different arguments from different kinds of people and to try to overcome those arguments and parry them. And just, it'll make you a better candidate to have more competition. And so, you know, I don't think anyone should fear this. And I think, you know, everyone should, like, let's hear what Deval has to say. Let's hear what Mike Bloomberg has to say. That's, you know, there. I will say, and I said this on Monday, there is something that does bother me about we get to hear what Mike Bloomberg has to say and we get to hear what Tom Steyer has to say because they are billionaires, and so therefore that money has bought them speech. But that is a larger problem with the campaign finance system that we have here. Right. And so, but beyond that, like, go ahead, water's warm, everyone jump in.
And to the people who say, well, it's unfair because all these other candidates have been running for a year, yes, it is. And it'll be the voters to decide whether that is how to assess that unfair advantage or disadvantage, however you want to look at it. And just people will decide. And there's the history of people getting in late has, I think, almost never worked out. Maybe this will be different, but Wes Clark, Rick Perry, Fred Thompson, there's an array of people who jumped in late. And I think the one thing we should note is that the overwhelming number of Democrats are satisfied with the field. And to the extent they have a complaint, it's there are too many candidates. But so that's a hurdle for these candidates who want to get in. And we'll see what happens. Yep.
All right. That's all we have for today. Thanks again to Neil Katyal for joining the pod, and we will see you next week.
Bye, everyone.